A weathered homesteader had dwelled in solitude for nearly a decade before a Comanche lady pleaded for shelter. For those endless 9 years, the cabin on the remote rim of the plains stood as a spot where just one fellow's boots thudded through the hush. Harlan Whitaker once envisioned a lively hearth brimming with chuckles, yet fate had robbed him of that vision, abandoning him to a stillness so profound that even the planks groaned in isolation. His routine unfolded in that unyielding pattern, caring for the herd, mending what broke, fixing plain suppers, and lingering by the hearth till slumber claimed him. He'd grown used to this routine, not because it was simple, because it asked nothing of his soul, which he'd sealed tight way. So when the hounds started yapping that late dusk, sharp, restless, Harlan sensed a tightness he hadn't known in ages. He ventured out, lantern held aloft, peering at the frosty earth. At first, the gloom showed only far-off silhouettes, but then, motion, sluggish, aching, near to slithering. A figure was hauling itself toward his place. Drawing nearer, the light spilled over a lady crumpling into the drifts, gasping in ragged heaves, her garb ripped, her flesh scratched and battered, her dark tresses laced with shells and quills, her lineage plain as day. Comanche. Harlan didn't pause. He dropped to one knee, sensed the quivers in her frame, spotted the slash on her shoulder. No words passed. He scooped her up and bore her within. Her slightness caught him off guard. Indoors, as the blaze's warmth kissed her cheeks, she flinched, and her lids parted. Dread danced in those eyes, like a creature trapped. Harlan spoke, steady, soothing, told her she was secure. She pushed back at first, but weariness won out. She let herself lean on him. Her name was Lyra. She hailed from a Comanche outpost just beyond the low hills, but her kin had been struck without warning by raiders with rifles. She painted the mayhem, little ones wailing, old folks scrambling, shots ripping the dark. Her words stumbled, as if those horrors still rang in her ears. She'd bolted through the woods alone, hurt, blind to who'd made it through. Harlan tended the cut on her shoulder, binding it with sure fingers. She eyed him keen, like weighing him against every threat she'd fled. For Harlan, tending her stirred echoes of bygone days, nursing his departed spouse when she faltered, being wanted by another. A piece of him he'd figured gone for good, flickered faint, alive once more. Time slipped by, and Lyra's chills faded gradual. She sipped the stew he pressed on her wary-like, her gaze tracing the room as if etching it in memory. She marked the shotgun by the beam, the frayed jacket, the spurs near the threshold. Harlan could see her plotting ways out, still doubting if she ought to trust this lone soul who'd hauled her in. But maybe it was his tone, or those tired eyes, that eased her fears. She wasn't at risk here. Harlan reckoned she held back some tales, but he let it lie. At last, she breathed a fact that straightened his spine. The raiders weren't random thugs. They were after her group on purpose. Not just for goods, they aimed to seize territory, shove her folk aside, crush any fight left. She'd caught their mutterings ere she ran. They meant to hunt down every last one. Harlan felt fury rise in his gut, a rage he'd starved for years. The thought of brutal sorts, preying on a gal who could scarce stand, lit a guardian spark deep within. He vowed she'd be guarded here, and he stood by it. Lyra looked taken aback by his resolve, but held her tongue. As shadows lengthened, she sank into rest by the flames. Harlan watched her breaths even out, and for the first stretch in ages, he bore a duty to another soul. He couldn't say why destiny dumped her on his stoop, but he grasped this. Whatever road stretched on, the lonesome burrow he dug into was done. A shift had come, one that pulled and past the sorrow he'd wallowed in so long. Come dawn, Lyra had clawed back a bit of vigor. She perched mute at the bench, ear cocked to every rustle beyond the walls. Harlan glanced sidelong, catching the taut line of her shoulders, the wariness of one who dodged peril for days on end. He slid a trencher her way, urged her to fill up good. She dipped her head, thanks wordless but heartfelt. Harlan knew harboring her carried peril. Should those trackers stumble on the spread, storm clouds would roll in. Still, he couldn't chase her off. She'd staggered in near the brink, chased by fright and need. Casting her loose had gnawed him forever. So he said she could bide as long as she required. She held his stare a beat, something yielding in her face, like she'd braced for scorn from an outsider. Post-meal, Harlan readied his mount and said he'd scout the fringes for signs. Lyra pressed to join, loath to hunker idle indoors. He wavered, then nodded. Hurt or no, her wits were keen, and she knew her pursuers truer than he. Traversing the flats, they hunted traces of passage. Harlan swept the bluffs while Lyra crouched to probe the frost for snapped twigs or scuffs. It didn't take long. She stiffened, gaze sharpening on a shallow mark. A heel print. New! Not his, not hers. Folks had prowled the grounds. Ice slithered down Harlan's back. His hunters crept nearer than he'd fathomed. They hustled back swift. Harlan bolted the portals and shutters, chambered his scattergun, braced for clash. Lyra hovered by the hearth. Fingers knotted, breaths shallow. Harlan settled opposite, said she didn't need to stand this solo. Her eyes welled. She shared of her clan, how they'd roamed serene with the winds, wronging none. Of her kid sister, who'd swung to shield their sight, but got swamped. She couldn't tell if the girl, or anyone, had pulled through. That not knowing crushed her. Harlan heard her out, aching to lighten the load. Mid-chat, a scrape outside snapped them rigid. Harlan edged to the pane, spied forms slinking by the shed. He signaled Lyra to duck low, slipped her a blade for safeguard. Out he went, piece at ready, stalking the outbuilding wary. The latch whined faint as he nudged it wide. Two fellas loomed there, pawing at my stores. They whipped round, startled but game, their stares iced over at the sight of me, proving Lyra's every word. No call, one leveled as iron. Harlan shot true and Bedlam broke. The other charged. They tumbled into the pens, clawing fierce. Harlan scrapped with grim fire. Fueled by more than just breath, he shielded one with none else to turn to. It rapped with the intruders bolting yonder, bloodied and broke. Harlan held off pursuit. He trudged indoors, heaving, dude shredded and grim. Lyra flew to me, face pinched and fret. Spotting me whole, ease flooded her. She warned those curs to circle back, thicker. Their bolt wasn't yield, it was rallying. Harlan got it, but sensed deeper still. Dreaded fled him. For good! Those seasons he'd skulked from hurt, cut off from all, had carved him empty. Yet now, thanks to Lyra, because she leaned on me, my days had aim anew. That eve, Lyra lingered fireside, tone gentle as she gave thanks, not mere for pulling her through, but for that rare haven she had lost since the raid. Harlan drew near, her words sinking deep into my chest. I couldn't guess their tomorrows, or what threats lurked beyond the flats, but I'd not leave her to them lone. In the hush after, a bond wove silent twixt them, tender, chancy, but true. And as embers played across the timbers, I saw clear. The days I'd mourned as buried 9 years back were easing into bloom again, kindled by a soul who tapped my door for naught but heat, and wound up rousing all I'd lost the knack to sense.